Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first day of virtual sessions with the Illinois Environmental Health Association. My name is Arne Burns, and I'll be hosting the virtual sessions for these next 2 days. For our first session today, we have Dottie Laster, and she is with Trafficking Victim Rescue Central, and today's topic will be centered around human trafficking. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dottie, and she will get us started.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Let me start with, if you could save someone from being enslaved, would you? If you could save a child from being raped or tortured or even put into a situation where they become deceased, would you? And I know the answer is yes, because you are all here under a job of protecting public safety. And so as we go through this today, I want you to know that you are on the front lines to be able to make that the person we talked about safe, someone being enslaved, a child where they shouldn't be. And the consequences of not doing so are dire. So we don't have a choice. So I am so honored to be here today. I have combated trafficking for 20 years. And some of the best cases I've done have had to do with inspectors. And as we go through what we're going to learn today, you'll see how and why your roles have been so important and continue to be important for this issue that sadly has not shrunk. I thought after 20 years there'd be less of it, but I'm not sure that's the case yet. So anyhow, just a little bit about myself. I started this in 2003 when I was getting my master's degree at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. I was attending a speech from someone from the State Department, and she talked about this new law called human trafficking. And when she described what it was, that it was modern slavery, it's like a bolt of lightning hit me right there in the speech. And I saw this kind of fast forward of my life and what I would do to combat it. And I really don't think I had a choice. And I still don't sometimes. It's kind of funny that even if I try to stop and do something else, that I get pulled back in. So I was where I was supposed to be. I got the information I needed at the right time. And there was nothing at all to read or go on. And I just started training right then. And I did it with research and the help of a professor, which led me to my first job in Houston, Texas, where I built the Human Trafficking Task Force that was funded by the Department of Justice. And again, no place to go to learn how to do it. We just had to do it on the fly the way we thought. And that actually turned out really well because the people I had to learn from were the victims. And so they taught me well. Then I next moved, well, in that time period around 2005, I triggered the largest rescue in US history of human trafficking victims. I rescued a 16-year-old little girl being put out into cantinas, and that triggered the rescue of 120 other victims and several pretty cutting edge prosecutions. It also led to the first ever extradition of someone for trafficking back to the United States. So I was really proud of that. That particular bad guy got 40 years in prison for trafficking the minor and others that I had rescued, or the minor I rescued and others that her statement led to the rescue of. So it's kind of like a domino effect. When you help someone, you help many people. So next I moved on to California, and I built the human trafficking task forces in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Orange counties there. And that was around 2006 and 7. I stayed there till 2008 and started my own company, which I do consulting and training. And I still rescue victims of trafficking. So in a short nutshell, that's how we got here. If you kind of search some of the videos on human trafficking or documentaries, I was part of MSNBC in their series, Sex Slave Texas Rescue. I was on Vanity Fair Confidential. It talks about the story I just mentioned, the largest rescue in U.S. history, and it's on Discovery Investigates. It's still showing now. And then some things with news things like ABC, CNN, CBS. I also worked on the recent case that's been in the news the last few months, the Long Island serial killer, where they had arrested the alleged killer after 13 years and 11 or 12 bodies on the beach there in Long Island. So it's kind of known as the Gilgo Beach murders. And all that to say, how on earth did I wind up in that? I just was helping look for a missing person and tripped into this horrible, horrible situation. But it all goes back to the trafficking. The women that wound up there were being exploited by others, and they had people forcing them to do it. So, in a nutshell, we're going to learn how trafficking hides in plain sight in front of everybody and operates pretty freely. And I hope together we can stop that, because it just needs to stop. It's very barbaric, obviously. So let me get here and see if I share my screen. So in preparing for today, I thought, well, what can I find that's near to where you all are? I'm so lucky. I've worked with Northwestern University, and I do travel there to teach quite a bit into Illinois, various areas. So I kind of miss being there today, but I think this may show you what I'm saying applies no matter where here is for you. So trafficking happens here, no matter where here is for you.
Thank you all for coming out here today.
Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart announcing charges for 10 different people accused of a variety of human trafficking related crimes.
I can't emphasize enough to you, there's literally no end to the number of victims we come across, so we're just overwhelmed.
Dart offering a snapshot of the problem on the hands of law enforcement agencies here and all over the United States. A flurry of arrests making just a tiny dent in a big problem.
To put it in some type of perspective here, the only reason those are the numbers is because that's how much personnel I have to put into this. If I had more, I'd be making thousands more. Thousands more.
Cook County Sheriff's Police giving us an inside look at the undercover process for catching traffickers.
And then there's hundreds of them.
Ads on sites like Listcrawler and Mega Personals, used by traffickers to take advantage of victims and turn a quick buck. Dart says everything is on the table on these sites, from trafficking, prostitution, and child pornography, to name a few.
If you were to go to any of their sites right now, there's literally no mystery what's going on at the sites. None whatsoever.
Dart believes any significant crackdown will need to come at the federal level to help hold these sites accountable.
Clearly, there's literally no conceivable way we are going to arrest our way out of this problem. It's not going to happen.
He also challenged parents to keep an eye on their kids and really monitor how they use their phones and computers.
There's this bizarre notion that somehow the kids and the young adults that are getting trafficked are from a different planet. We've had the entire spectrum.
The sheriff says his office plans to reach out to some of these sites to see if they can work together to prevent some of these trafficking-related crimes. Of course, it could end up being down to each individual site as for how helpful they'll be.
Okay.
Rufus hates.
Just an example of, a sheriff saying, I'm overwhelmed. So anyhow, I'm speaking to you from Texas, but what I say matters no matter where you are. So anyhow, let's get down into the nitty-gritty and how we can get trafficking out of here, no matter where here is for you. we're gonna take a break at about just before 11 o'clock. And so just know I'm not gonna you'll have a bit of time to rest and stretch and maybe even talk a little bit about what we're learning. And then we'll come back with the conclusion of the presentation. Also, I'm not there, but if I was, I would say, hey, if you need to take a phone call or slip out, that's fine. Go ahead. You're not hostage. We're certainly glad to have you. And so anyhow, let's go. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant, so I'll slow it down as much as I can. So I just want to, there we go. So human trafficking is modern slavery. It involves, I just want to make sure, is this displaying correctly?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So human trafficking, as I've said before, is modern slavery. It's an unfortunate word that was used when they created the law. The lawmakers were modeling it after global or international laws that already existed. And so in the United States, we never considered ourselves a source country, but we are. But in the beginning, we didn't really understand what trafficking was. We kind of get it confused with other crimes. So part of what we're going to learn today is what is actually trafficking, as opposed to what we think it is as a group of people. You'll notice behind me is Frederick. It's a little hard to see him, but that's Frederick Douglass. He was a man that was enslaved in the 1800s, and he fought slavery with education, newspapers, and speaking. He said, I don't acknowledge that I can be enslaved even as a child, even though he grew up in a world where that was considered legal and normal. And so I use his words and I use his inspiration in trying to explain what happens now. So whenever I present or have an office, he's always right over my shoulder. In an unusual but heartwarming twist of fate, I actually rescued one of his direct descendants a few years ago. As a 16-year-old boy that was being taken to Houston to be trafficked. And his mom reached out to me, noticed my picture, and let me know how they were related. And so I was successful in getting him back. So again, just to reiterate, no matter where here is or who you are, trafficking may touch you, and or you may not realize it's touching you. So anyhow, Frederick Douglass, my historical hero. So anyhow, it really is modern slavery. If you read anything he wrote, it mirrors exactly what I hear from victims today. It involves the exploitation of persons for very specific two reasons: commercial sex, which we will define in a minute, or forced labor. Victims may be illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, or quite often US citizens. And I think that's something that is a little bit hard for us to understand, but that's what the sheriff was saying in the video I just played to you. He said, we've had it across the board. If you think trafficking is happening somewhere else, you're wrong. It's happening right where you are. And that's what he was saying when he said we've seen everything. So it's one thing on this earth that really doesn't discriminate. Traffickers can sell anybody: men, women, children, boys, girls, legal immigrants, illegal immigrants, disabled, disfigured. They will market to somebody that thinks that's a fetish, or they can use that. So we used to kind of always use these words, oh, it was just homeless people or substance addicted or teenagers that ran away. But I think you're going to learn throughout the presentation today how this works and how it works on anybody. I literally just a few years ago had a victim that was so wealthy. When I found her, her parents sent a private jet to pick her up. So it's not just homeless people, not just people that made bad decisions. It's quite stunning and amazing people that get trafficked. it often involves some sort of border that's crossed, but trafficking, so the worst word in our law is trafficking because no movement is required. And due to the word trafficking, we think of some sort of flow or movement. A child can be trafficked in their home and never have left. A woman can be trafficked by the person she calls husband, boyfriend, father, brother. A man could be trafficked in a similar situation. I'm quite proud to say that I was part of getting the first ever male Violence Against Women Act visa due to a very strong athletic man who was incredibly harmed by a woman. And so it doesn't discriminate in any way. And I think that's kind of scary. It means everyone's a target. So traffickers are able to operate in front of us because they use force, fraud, and coercion. Well, force we all understand. If someone holds a gun to your head and a witness sees it, police are going to come, it's going to be stopped. It's dangerous, but all you have to do is get away from the gun. Fraud and coercion are a little different. It works even with no gun, even with no force. It works 24/7. You could have a SWAT team surrounding you, and if someone knows how to coerce you, you can never be saved. And so that's what traffickers use because it's low risk. No one sees it. It's in the victim's mind. It's invisible. And it's very difficult to get the victim to believe they can get help. Trafficking can be prosecuted on a variety of grounds. It doesn't just have to be trafficking. And that's where the role of inspectors becomes so important, because one of the most amazing cases I did early on, I was part of, is we made a nuisance case against some strip clubs. And so what crime that would never be witnessed by a police officer, we were able to start documenting through the inspectors that frequent in the club. And it wasn't unusual. The clubs didn't think there was a risk to them. And so we got them by surprise. So our goal today, I believe when you leave here, you'll have a common knowledge about human trafficking in the United States. In 20 years, I've never had to leave the US. My master's degree is in international relations. I thought I would be doing this all over the world, and yet I never left here. So I'm focused on trafficking in the United States. And also, I think you'll be able to identify victims and their perpetrators much easier in the next couple of hours, because they're in front of all of us, but they have really good disguises. And the goal, every time I step out, every time I have a group of more than two, my goal is to make the community safe for children and trafficking victims, and to make it also hostile for traffickers that wish to operate in our communities. So we're going to talk about trafficking. We've already done a little bit of what's going on in Illinois. I'll have some other cases in the surrounding states. We're going to talk about laws and definitions, red flag indicators, and I have a card that you can download that you can print with those red flag indicators. And then most importantly, we're going to focus on how to document trafficking, because we can see it, but if it's not recorded somewhere, then it may not be useful. So how can we document this? By the end of the course, you'll be able to at least list 2 places trafficking is occurring. And I think you'll already know, raise your hand. One of them is here, wherever here is for you. So that's one place it's occurring. It's kind of my little joke. I need a t-shirt. Trafficking is happening here, no matter where here is for you. And then you'll be able to cite at least one barrier to victims disclosing their crimes. So that's why it's important for us to help them. It's too much to expect someone under a hard, harsh, high level of coercion to rescue themselves. And then, of course, we'll be able to list 3 red flag indicators of trafficking, which I believe would be great to document when you're doing inspection. So, human trafficking falls under federal and state laws. And so while the law may be a little bit dry and boring, what it does is get us all on the same definition, the same page, and make sure that you are able to communicate with whoever you need to, that there are laws in effect to stop this. So bear with me as we go through the laws. There's 2 types of human trafficking: forced labor and commercial sex. These are images of what it looks like. You don't really see a crime there. You see things that we witness every day: a nanny with a stroller, maids cleaning a hotel room, a guy working construction, some girls, maybe showing off a little bit, but they're just talking to somebody. So how do we move from that to human trafficking? That's the key. That's the disguises. That's one of the many, many disguises that they use. So in 2000, the United States passed the Trafficking Victims, keyword is Victim Protection Act. That was at the end of 2000, the end of the Clinton administration, and then the Bush administration came in and moved it forward. So this was passed bipartisan. It wasn't a one side or the other thing. It was something we in the United States agreed. We do not want slavery in the United States. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was passed, and it defined trafficking as anyone held in service of another through force, fraud, or coercion for commercial sex or forced labor. Or, big, or, if you remember nothing else, please remember this one. Or where anyone under 18 is involved in commercial sex. There's no excuse for that. We don't allow children to consent to sell their bodies for sex. Any child in commercial sex is a victim of trafficking. If they said, I want to do it, this is great, it's my life plan, we don't allow that. So any minor in commercial sex is automatically a victim. The act covers everyone involved, and this is what is so important to document on reports, on anything that you're writing, recording, or pointing out to an authority. It covers everyone involved: the recruiter, whoever transported them, if they were abducted, which is rare, usually they're lured, but if they're abducted, if they're harbored, if they were purchased or received, all those people are responsible the same. There's not one person more responsible than the other. All involved the same. And I mentioned that Long Island serial killer case. That's really important. I've been screaming for years that whoever killed those women, yes, they deserve to face prosecution, but so do the people that drove them, that put them out on the internet, that coerced them. All those people are responsible the same. And this law allows that to be so. So again, any of these people that put that person into slavery is responsible the same. So it also strengthened the sentencing guidelines to be pretty severe. Yes. So the sentencing guidelines were increased to be very severe. A case should get 10 to 20 years. If certain other things happened, and we saw some examples in Texas where a prosecutor got more than 99 years per person, it adds life imprisonment for death, kidnapping or aggravated sexual assault. And so what this prosecutor did is stacked a bunch of charges. Remember the earlier slide said they could be prosecuted on a variety of grounds? Well, she took that to heart, and she got 99, she got 100, 120 years by stacking all the charges of what happened to one victim. And just think about that just for a moment. Please absorb, what does one victim have to go through to net that type of sentence for the perpetrator? They went through a lot. So the word trafficking, it doesn't really explain all the harm that comes upon the victims and society. And really important, again, the second thing I hope you will remember, if nothing else sticks, is that it's a possible life sentence if the victims are 14 or under, not under 14, but 14 or under in commercial sex. This is how much we don't allow children to sell themselves for sex. If they're 14 or under, all the adults around could face a life sentence. And so we want to make sure they do. We don't want our children being prostituted. We don't want our children in pornography. We don't want them in strip clubs. So what is sex trafficking? Again, it redefines what we talked about as human trafficking, but it brings it down to a very specific definition. The recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person. So that's the person that lured them, the person that drove them, the person that facilitated them, and the person that bought them. Obtaining of a person through force, fraud, or coercion for purposes of commercial sex, or all of that above, and the kid is under 18. There is no need to prove force, fraud, and coercion when the child is a minor. And this is really important because some states, if you remember Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein was prosecuted, and he didn't even really get jail the first time. And what's so sad about that is the man that prosecuted him trained me back in 2004 and 5. So he knew what kind of sentence he was giving, and he knew what the children had gone through. And so that was really hard to compute. I don't think I'll ever understand that. So, but he did have a charge that caused him to register as a sex offender. Well, in New Mexico, they didn't require Epstein to register as a sex offender because even lawyers who should know this and should be able to read it confused age of consent to sex with commercial sex. So I want to point this out now. A minor who's in the backseat of a car with a boyfriend is a totally different thing than a minor being sold for sex. There is no age of consent. So New Mexico should have required him to register because he was convicted of sex trafficking children, and they didn't. And I hope that's a mistake we never see again. So anyone who obtained, recruited, harbored, transported, facilitated in any way a minor in commercial sex is a victim, is a trafficker. And if that victim was under 14 and under, 14 and under, they should face a life sentence. Now let's switch to labor trafficking. So that has nothing to do with stripping porn or prostitution. This is about labor or service. So a lot of times those are really difficult to uncover because there's not an inherent crime going on. You saw the pictures of the guy working in construction. That doesn't bring many people's attention. So what labor trafficking is, providing or obtaining the labor or service of a person through threats of harm or through any scheme, pattern, or plan. And I love these words, and you might use them in reports later. any scheme, pattern, or plan that places that person in fear of harm or serious consequences. Maybe it's that, well, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to have you deported. If you don't do what I say, my brother, the police officer, is going to come over and have a talk with you. So that's what they're talking about in this abuse or threatened abuse of some sort of legal process. Sometimes bad guys will marry a victim and say, well, if you don't do what I say, I'll take your kid and divorce, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. So someone that can use the legal process to cause someone to be compliant. That's what they're talking about. And it's for labor. So a lot of times you'll see in these labor cases, involuntary servitude, debt bondage. And that's where sometimes you'll see the smuggling and the trafficking intermingle. Maybe they were smuggled here, but when they got here, the deal changed. And now they're forced to work to pay off more money than they'd agreed to. You'll see a lot of that. Also, there was a case in Orange County, California, involuntary servitude. They had a young child living as a domestic servant. Well, the family was from Egypt. And they said, well, it's normal where we're from, to which the authorities said, well, but you're in the United States, and it's not. You can't enslave a child for labor. So in this case, a family had rented a child from someone they knew in Egypt, and that child was a domestic servant. So peonage, involuntary servitude, religion or cultural norms are no defense to this. So sorry, if you want to do that, don't live here. Is the way the law addresses it, that no, there's not an excuse for servitude. So under this act, as I pointed out, it's the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So along with the act are protections for victims. So the first part, I talked about what can happen to the people that are trafficking. Now we can talk about what happens to the victims. Victims are not to be treated as criminals. And literally, I spend most of my day getting victims out of jail. We still, as a community, don't always look past the disguise. Recently, last year, I was helping a woman that was facing 35 years to life. Imagine that. You're a victim and you're facing life in prison, being blamed for the crime you're a victim of. I was able to get her free, but I just wonder how many like her are out there that no one knows. She was facing that crime because the bad guys had a bunch of drugs, and when police raided, they all pointed the finger at her as owning all the drugs. Well, when I pointed out she couldn't even control who she had sex with, I doubt she could control all the drugs. The prosecutor realized, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. So in a lot of evidence, I, built up and supported, but a 5-page report set her free. So we can do this. And she's a beautiful person that you would want to see free. Also, if they're immigrants, that was a US citizen. If they're immigrants, they have immigration protection. These have to be filed for. They don't just come automatically. You need someone that's knowledgeable in immigration law to help them. But the law made several options available for trafficking victims. One is a T visa, and the letters are arbitrary. It just happened to fall on T when it was time to do the trafficking visa. So it's easy to remember. And then U visas. U visas are for any victim of a very violent felony. So violent felonies, which trafficking is one of the violent felonies listed. So a victim from another country doesn't have to automatically be detained and deported. They need immigration help, and then they can be here free. One of the victims I helped, I want to say about 10 years ago, her and her little children, she had 2 children. Yesterday, just yesterday, she went for her US citizenship interview, and they tell you right there if you're approved or not. So I got this huge glowing list of photos and messages that she is a new US citizen. She'll be sworn in about 90 days, but she is now a US citizen. And when I met her, that would have never been possible. She couldn't imagine it. So she had been through horrible things. She had so few options. She actually came home with me, and I kept her in my house with her kids for about 6 months. And she now has a master's degree in accounting, and her children have won National Honor Society awards and all kinds of glowing things she's done. The point being, they had enslaved her and lured her with the hope of education. She's from a country where women aren't educated. And then they told her she can't be educated. So to that, I said, ha. And she now has a master's degree. So, anyhow, and she's a US citizen. So, anyhow, if you just help, sometimes it's just amazing what they can achieve. Another victim another visa available is a special juvenile immigrant visa. You hear all this word, the speaking of unaccompanied minors hitting our border. I'm here in Texas. I'm 90 miles from the border. We hear about it all the time. Well, any minor that reaches the United States that has been denied access to one or both parents, or has been abused, abandoned, or neglected, can ask for a special juvenile immigrant visa, and that also concurrently gets them a legal permanent resident status. So if you see a child that is missing one or both parents, that has been abused, abandoned, and neglected, they need immigration help, and they can be given a visa. And we would want to. Our country protects children. Sometimes in our arguing, we forget some of the things that we actually all agree on. And I do believe we agree that protecting children is important, no matter whose children they are. So, and depending on the different circumstances, victims may have other immigration remedies. So, being a trafficking victim can also be a positive defense to some crimes. A few years ago, there was a victim pretty much in the main news that was being prosecuted for killing the trafficker that was selling her for sex. And she was facing a charge of murder. And it sort of got fixed. I kind of wish they would have been more clear, but she did get out of jail due to that positive defense for some crimes. So if it's related to the trafficking, then as I explained in the one that I got released, that was related to the trafficking, not to her acting on her own. It is a positive defense, and the state and federal laws allow for that. Victims might often need protective orders, relocation, and one thing that really I think everyone needs to know is victims often appear mentally ill. I know a lot of the victims have been put into mental hospitals many times over and over. They're actually not mentally ill. Some could be, but most often they are a normal person reacting normally to a huge amount of trauma. And so they appear to be bipolar or schizophrenic or all kinds of things, paranoid, but they're not. And it's actually what's happening to them. So I often ask people, if you're dealing with victims, please be careful on the mental illness label. They need, it's like giving cancer medicine to a heart patient. It might be really good, but if you're treating the wrong thing, if you're treating them as mentally ill when they're actually traumatized, you may be doing more harm. So a few years ago, I mentioned earlier, it's kind of funny how I occasionally try to get away from trafficking and do something else. And I thought, oh, I'll do missing persons. I'll do that. I'm tired of trafficking. It's been 10 years and I've had enough. So I get into missing persons, and I call it fast food trafficking now. I had so many cases you can't imagine. I was like overrun, like 3, 4 a day. And so missing persons is kind of the intersection where trafficking victims can be found. And I did really good. I found 98% of them, 94% alive, which I wish that was 100% and 100%, but my skills turned out to be really good for working in missing persons. So if anyone wants to dive into missing persons, I suggest teaming up. I mean, if anyone wants to help trafficking victims and learn a lot really quickly, I suggest teaming up with a missing persons nonprofit. They need your help. So back to protections for victims. All victims will qualify for crime victims compensation. Each state has their own fund that they manage. It's usually in the Attorney General's office. And so it's good to know that if you do identify a victim and get help to them and get authorities involved, it can actually not harm the victim. And I know sometimes people don't act because they think, well, I don't want to make it worse. But if knowledgeable people help, you can make it much better for them. And so one of those ways is they qualify for crime victims compensation. And that reimburses expenses due to the crime. So counseling, transportation for whoever takes them to counseling. If they had to give a sexual assault nurse's exam and their clothes were cut off, it reimburses the clothes, all kinds of other things. So if it's a sexual crime, if they need to relocate, it'll give them a one-time money for deposits and rent deposits and light bills. Things that really can be the difference between not getting harmed again or being just bait over and over. So I always point out that crime victims compensation, it is a way to get victims what they need. I talk about the sexual assault nurses exam, especially when minors have been missing for more than a day or so. I urge them to always get that because it offers not just evidence of what happened, of course, but it offers preventative medicine for sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy. And there's only a short window of time those are effective. So if you are around any kids that have been missing or trafficked, they need that ASAP, whether they want it or not. They need to go get it. So also, if you see children in places they shouldn't be, you might need to coordinate with local authorities, Child Protective Services, or whoever in your area, whatever they call that type of service, because they're not wearing a T-shirt that says "I'm trafficked." It needs some investigation to find out. But if you feel there's a minor in trouble, I think we all have a duty to do our best to protect them. So all that to summarize. Was the person held in service of another? So we're talking about slavery for commercial sex or labor. Or were they going to be held? Because this law is beautiful. If the bad guy is kind of dumb enough to get caught before he traffics the person, but maybe in the process, they can be prosecuted the same as if they completed it. So if someone's caught transporting children for commercial sex, they didn't make it to the strip club yet, they can be prosecuted the same. And was the victim's service obtained or maintained through threats, through psychological manipulation, confiscation of their legal documents, any other type of coercion? So we're back to any scheme, pattern, or plan to compel labor from a person. So very important to document these things, and we'll go through and give examples of how to document holding someone's legal documents. Really important. So let's dive into the difference between smuggling and trafficking. And I think this is the biggest myth and misunderstanding that I come up with as I'm out in the public doing what I do, or working with authorities trying to explain what's happened to a person. So this is the second thing that I hope you'll remember from today. Maybe it's the 2.0, like the third thing. But really important slide here. Smuggling is an offense against the US border. The victim is the United States. There's not an individual that's a victim. It requires crossing a border illegally. I used to joke when I was in California that I brought my Texas passport, but I wasn't smuggled because I didn't cross any borders illegally. So just remember, borders can be crossed in trafficking, but in smuggling, we're talking about an illegal border crossing. Smugglers typically make their money once they've reached the border. It's a business deal. Someone says, hey, I want to, go around the law. And the smuggler says, I have the way to get you there. And they agree on a price. The smuggling takes place. The person pays the smuggler and walks away. That's smuggling. Sometimes the smuggler will change the terms upon arrival to wherever, let's say the United States. And they may throw in, well, let's see, we're going to actually charge you double now. And we're going to hold you in this house until your family comes up with the extra money. That is still not trafficking. That is maybe hostage taking, maybe extortion. You could come up with some crimes that is. It's just not trafficking. They might even, if there's women, rape them, beat them. That is still not trafficking. That's rape. That's holding them against their will. It's a crime. It's just not this crime. However, it becomes trafficking once labor or service becomes involved. So let's take that same scenario where someone was smuggled, they agreed to be smuggled, they come to the United States, conditions change, and they say, now we want more money. The person can't pay more money. The family can't pay more money. So the smuggler says, well, guess what? I've got a payment plan for you. You're going to be forced to work in my uncle's restaurant until this debt is paid for. Now we have trafficking because you have labor or service that's compelled. Or they could say, well, since your family didn't pay, now you're going to my brothel in Houston where you're going to work off this debt endlessly by having sex with people, and we're taking the money. So again, starts as smuggling, but when it turns into the labor or commercial sex, then it's trafficking. So now we're over to the right side. So trafficking, now you have a victim, an offense against a person. It involves some sort of labor or service. But the traffickers often disguise themselves as smugglers to get control over somebody. And then they use that control to maintain labor or service long after the border was crossed. Now we have trafficking. I have a little short film later. We'll show an example of that. So traffickers and smugglers often will use documents to be a part of their coercion. So holding, even if it's a real or fake identity document, is its own felony. And so one of the cases we did in Orange County, we had stunning evidence when authorities raided both the business and the home at the same time. And in the home, there was a locked drawer with a gun on top of all the passports of the victims at the business. So photographs of that became evidence of holding their identity document. And then, of course, testimony of the victims added to that, or statements actually, because the evidence was so overwhelming that everyone pled guilty. They didn't even have to take them to trial. And that was one of the big things that helped, documenting those identity documents that were held away from the victims. So let's take can we take like a 5-minute break?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and
Okay.
push pause on the recording and we can come back in 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, or maybe just right at the top of the hour. Will that work?
Yeah, that's perfect. Bring it back at
Okay,
11.
okay. Okay. I hope everyone got to take a little breather. I know that the law stuff is a little dry. But so the so does anyone know where, hold on just a second. No, I'm not advancing. There we go. So does anyone know where trafficking occurs? Is it here? Wherever here is. Well, in my hometown at the time, we had about 48,000 people. And it was another one of those days where I go, I'm done, I've stopped, I'm not going to do trafficking anymore, I'm going to do something else. And I said to my daughter, get in the car, let's go. And I really just needed a day off. I I quit all the time because I'm not really don't. It's not that I don't want to do this, it's that I forget to maybe rest a little. So that was one of those days. I was just a little tired. And I drove to have breakfast at a place I don't normally go to, but I don't know, for some reason that day I did. And I was pulling up, this big white van with the license number 666 cut me off. And then a line of people got out of the van like children walking in kindergarten, like one behind the other, grown adults and a little child. And I just laughed and I go, oh, I'm the only person in this whole town that knows what that means. And I hoped I was wrong, but I wasn't. So I alerted all of our authorities, and what became really important were the health inspectors, because they could go in anytime and they could document, write, ask questions, look at who worked there and whether they had the little cards, the certifications you had to be in the kitchen, if it matched up with who was there. There was just a lot of things that became very valuable from a health inspection point of view to both the state and federal authorities. So it was a bittersweet win because I didn't quite get the folks shut down that I was going for. But in starting that investigation, it led to 32 of these buffets being closed, and then 32 convictions for labor trafficking. Throughout the United States, they were operating out of Houston, but all over the US, from Maine to Texas to all places in between. So anyhow, we made a little film about it. So it's just about 3 or 4 minutes. I hope it puts into perspective what we talked about earlier, how what I just talked about in the definitions and laws looks in real life.
In the spring of 2014, police and federal officials raided a string of restaurants spanning Texas and Louisiana, making over 70 arrests in what they claim was an illegal human trafficking operation exploiting workers from across Asia and Central America. Arrest documents indicate that a syndicate actively recruited workers, mostly in Asian-style buffet restaurants.
So Behind the Buffet is a documentary about what goes on in these all-you-can-eat buffets. And what looks like a cheap meal with a lot of volume actually comes with a really high price. So these organizations bring immigrants from Guatemala, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the labor broker distributes them to buffets throughout the United States. They will be taken to and from work often in the same vehicle. They will work with the same crew all day long, and then all those people will be put in the same vehicle and brought back to the same house, where they are often locked in rooms or even told to strip of their clothes when they enter the house so they can't run away.
We need to shine a light on a problem that lives in the shadows, but is often right in plain sight.
It's a business in the business of making money, and what we're finding, it's off of the backs of people who are really just trying to help their families.
Trafficking happens everywhere. The sex trafficking clearly gets more public attention. I mean, people see the massage parlors, the back page ads. The labor trafficking is really harder to uncover.
What the average person doesn't see are the little vans pulling up behind the restaurants.
The worker is a slave. They are under the control of a force of enforcers, not one person, not two people, but an organization. They work every day. They are not being paid, and if they do get a little bit of money, it's certainly not commensurate with the hours that they work. They are literally under the control of their employers 24 hours a day. The hook for the immigrants that gets them in this situation is that somehow they have been dislodged from their country for whatever reason. Maybe there's a push factor. Maybe they thought they were coming for a legitimate job. Maybe their family sent them and said, you must go because we're depending on you. They come into the United States either smuggled or maybe with false documents, and that's where the trafficking begins. So some of the red flags for workers being trafficked at a buffet are many cameras in the ceiling. If you look up and there's like 20 security cameras, but it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, that doesn't make sense. If the servers will take your order, but you can't really engage them in conversation, if you can feel someone controlling the room, or you feel like there's someone that has kind of an authoritarian energy about them, if they're coming to and from work in the same vehicle every day, and if you happen to see that they're also living in the same house, there's exploitation going on. I mean, imagine living with your whole staff 24 hours a day and working with them 7 days a week. You cannot do that without control. And the other thing is, you'll just feel something's not right. And when you get that intuition, you should look further. Compassion is contagious. If we care for these victims, and if we point it out in our communities, then we can move the appropriate authorities to disrupt them.
For more information or to get involved with Behind the Buffet, go to behindthebuffet.com.
So, so that particular case, it got really interesting to look at how the food was brought in. That man that you see is eating with the plates in there, that the waitress takes his plates away. You'll notice, I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't have a plate in front of me. I won't eat there. He said, "Oh, I ate all over China. I'm used to food that's not safe. It's okay. I'll be fine." He went there twice and got sick both times. So what I learned about the food is they import the food as well. And so if you look at I used a Freedom of Information Act request and got all the health department reports. They had never passed a health inspection. And they would fail greatly. I mean, just things that would make you sick reading the report. And there was actually a lot of complaints from the community to the health department that they had gotten sick there and that they had actually seen bones that weren't consistent with chicken, beef, or pork. And they operated for 20 years. So the other thing I did is I compared that also to the calls for service for police. And you would find just an overwhelming number of alarm calls, both to the restaurant and to the house where that man took them every night. There would be either the alarm tripped with no explanation, or the alarm tripped and they said, "Oh, it was a mistake," or somebody, a couple times people actually did make complaints about not being paid, but no one put all those those facts together for a long time. And so when you started looking at the documented history, it was like a open book when you put all the different agencies together, the police, the health department, immigration, you could see the picture. So that's how I was able to get the ones stopped that I did. You'll notice in the film, we blurred out faces and license plates because sadly, the authorities where I live did not choose to respond. So it's kind of sad. They are not in operation now, but not because of being arrested. The mall owner made a change in the mall, and the movie theater took their lease. So they're not operating now, but they're probably operating somewhere. So you'll see these little bitty towns with, lots of nail salons and buffets, and you just kind of have to wonder, how is that working? Why is it lucrative? And one of the nail salons here, I happened to be watching what the people inside called the big boss showed up in a Lamborghini to collect his money. So, wow, maybe we should all do nails. I don't know. But the reason that's so lucrative is, especially restaurants, if you don't pay for labor and you import food that's not of the quality that we would normally expect in a restaurant, it's high profit. If you're running a restaurant like you should, your two highest costs are food and labor. So it's a twisted business model that seems to replicate all over the US. So, and you notice in that van how the people come and go all together as a group. And it would come at the same time twice a day. And there's a car you'll see drive past the van. That's the chase car. So the van will load everyone up, and then another car follows the van so that no one interferes or no one gets out of the van. Also, once a week, they would go to the local Walmart or the local grocery store. And after working all day together, they would still all sit in the van while one or two, escorted by either the driver or the chase car guy, would escort them in to buy things and back out. So imagine a van full of people pulls into Walmart every Thursday and no one goes out to go shopping except people that are escorted. That's what we were seeing. So if you're just walking by, you don't notice it, but if you actually document, pay attention, write down, we documented and videoed and recorded everything we saw, then it became very easy to get them to plead guilty. Anyhow, and I will never eat at another of those buffets again. So it's kind of sad we have to be that careful just about food, but we do. Another one of those buffets in Houston. So one of the men had come from that labor agency. You'll see in the video they had the bust. The worker had been put into the kitchen immediately, and they had very powerful cutting tools in the kitchen. It was, again, a huge all-you-can-eat buffet. And he didn't know how to work them. He was from a rural part of Guatemala, didn't really know anything about power and mechanized tools. So he cut his leg very deeply. I guess when he turned it on, he dropped the whole thing and it cut a big part of his leg. Well, they didn't stop or take him to the doctor, do anything. They expected him to keep working. And somebody helped him get out the back door. And he showed up to a nonprofit asking for help with this big gaping wound. And so the other thing that's really a indicator is just these lack of care for safety or persons and these injuries that just, you wouldn't normally see. Lack of training. The immigration, the ICE officers were following these vans, and it became very difficult even for a federal agency to follow them because they would leave the labor force place, what we call the labor broker. A guy would get into a van and they would know if he was going to stop in San Antonio or if he was going to head to Maine or Lubbock, north, the panhandle of Texas. So even for a federal agency, it became very difficult because as soon as they saw that van leave, they had to be ready to stick with it however far it went. And they used their time during the holidays to actually do that, as they were a little bit slow for other reasons, and they could just dedicate the time they needed to follow him. Well, one reported back that he followed him to the restaurant and he parked up front to go inside. And by the time he got inside, the person that was been transported from the labor agency directly to the restaurant was walking out of the kitchen with a plate of food for, or a tub of food for the buffet. So there was no wash your hands, here's the training, here's what you do. He walked in the back door and walked through the kitchen door with food immediately. That's how those were working. So really important to document if they're being educated on food safety. If so, do they get their handler's permit? If so, is it them? Is it somebody else? So this particular restaurant was always in violation of their the work handler's permits. So anyhow, I'm sure there's more of them. I think we should try to make that not so easy for them. And in those cases, the food inspectors were key. Really good documentation. Got 32 people to plead guilty. Anyhow, let's switch gears a little. Here's other places that victims may hide. You know, agriculture work. We talked about domestic service. Those are really hard to find because they're in homes with the family enslaving them, and they don't have contact with anyone else, or if so, very few other people. Probably only people that the trafficking family knows. I talked earlier about that case for the Egyptian girl. If you look up ABC News and Cinderella, that's actually her story. They recorded it, and there's a video of the young girl at a child's birthday party. So the family at a birthday party, their children are about the same age as the slave that they had brought from Egypt. And you notice in the video, all the kids are playing and she's washing dishes. That became really important in their trial. They chose to go to trial and they were convicted. And that video was very important, where it showed all the kids playing and the same age kid was in the kitchen washing dishes. She was the servant for the party. They had forced her to sleep on the floor, no covers. It's amazing where if you met them in normal life, you wouldn't think they're criminals, but in the way they treated her was horribly criminal, horribly abusive. So she was denied going to school. She was denied food, just horribly treated. Well, she became an ICE agent. She became a US citizen and she became an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent. So I have a feeling she's doing a great job. So have any of y'all seen those magazine sellers? They come door to door and they say they're selling magazines to save money to go to college. Those are trafficking schemes. Vogue does not need young adults selling their magazines door to door. It just doesn't make sense. They're also kind of dangerous for anyone's house that they knock on. They're given a quota, and if they don't meet that quota, they use kind of gang techniques to make them comply. So at the end of the day, they'll be sexually assaulted or beaten. They'll use all the other victims to beat them. So they'll be incredibly desperate. And they might, you know, when you open your door, if you don't agree to what they want, they may jump in and grab something of value. So even when they've knocked on my door, I've chosen not to open. I've called my local police and asked for a welfare check on them. And I've gotten the van license plate numbers. And I did work on a case where we did rescue some victims and get an arrest. And the victim's tale of what they had been through was very traumatic and painful for her and for me even to hear. So that's another disguise. Another case that's kind of in the news you could see was a group of children from Africa that were forced to sing in a choir. And they performed more than any rock star schedule. They were booking them 2, 3, 4, 5 times a weekend, traveling all over. And these kids were all under 13. And they were singing in churches and selling merchandise, and the whole bit. And the story was, oh, they were from Africa and they're sending back money home to their village, and these kids are getting a U.S. education and blah blah blah. Well, the truth was they were getting no education. The teacher was on the bus, who was also one of the people exploiting them. The people that were putting them out in the churches were keeping all the money. And then when the children got old enough to kind of complain, they would send them back. Well, when they go back to their small village in Africa, people are like, well, where's the money? What'd you do? You went, and they suffered a lot of, just a lot of scarring emotionally, in addition to the physical exhaustion they endured. One of the men was he was a boy, was rescued by a woman at church that just thought something wasn't right, and she was correct. She wound up adopting him. He became a U.S. citizen. He is now a dentist. So it's so beautiful. But I learned directly from him how it worked, and what the bad guy would do is walk behind him and pinch him really hard and say, if you don't sing, you don't eat. If you don't dance, you don't eat, or whatever his thing was he was going to take away from him that day. So when they were singing and performing, it looked believable, but the backside of it was really bad. So, and there's a lot of them. I've seen several others in that type of scheme floating around. It makes me sad. So, carnival work, anything that's transitory that people see, but they don't really know or make contact with workers. We showed actually the first victim I ever probably rescued. I didn't even know. I was 15, and my mom knew someone I'd gone to high school with. She saw him at a carnival, and she told me, we're going to take him to his mom. And she said, no matter what he says, say we'll bring him back. And so we lied. I don't lie often, but I lied that day. And we took him to his mom. And later he was grateful, but he definitely was being exploited and hurt. And he was afraid he would be beaten if we didn't take him right back. So we took him a long way away and got him home. So some of those traveling things, or like hotel housekeeping, there's a lot of labor required for that's consistent, but the housekeepers don't necessarily interact with a lot of the guests. So when the oil fields were popping here around Texas, the hotels were literally booked out by oil companies, and a few unscrupulous ones around here went to enslaving the workers to keep the rooms clean. And I never got them prosecuted, but I think I got them disrupted. And that was just by bringing attention to them. And again, back to whoever was, inspecting them, letting them know, getting it documented. And suddenly it wasn't fun anymore to risk that 20-year sentence, and they shaped up. So anyhow, those are some of the places that you can see trafficking. Of course, strip clubs, anything with pornography, and anything with prostitution in addition to those. So you think, why would people sit for that? Why were those people so compliant in the video? Well, you don't see what happens to them in that house that they can't get out of. We purposely let them go inside and then had someone knock on the door, and it kind of spooked them, and they got all the victims back into the van, and the victims were putting on their clothes. They'd only been home a moment. And so what it kind of showed is that when they get home, they take their clothes from them and they give them back only when they go outside. So it's a way of keeping them from leaving. And we got that all videoed with timestamps and everything. A lot of times the isolation itself will keep them enslaved. So just letting them know someone's looking helps. Letting them know that we do, not want them to be harmed. The main thing that works all the time, though, is threats against someone else. And that's, if you don't come back, then I'm going to harm your friend or your family, or put your little sister in your place. And that really works all the time. So what I try to do is make sure that I know what the coercion is. Hopefully before, we get that victim away, we can figure it out. But if not, as soon as we get them back, we need to find out what's the coercion. And sometimes it's simply just saying, yes, you can call your family, will free them. Where without that, they won't speak, they won't talk, they won't give a statement. You just have to look for what that coercion is. So here's how I sum up all the schemes, patterns, and plans of trafficking. It's just cans of soda. And what I mean by that is, if you look at this picture, we've got root beer, we got Dr. Pepper, we got Mountain Dew. We all, are familiar with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Those are all just sugar and water and some carbonation. If you look at the ingredients, I bet they're very similar. It's just soda. But we wrap it up in a can and we give it a marketing scheme, and we all pick and choose our flavor that we like, and it appeals to, a market crowd. Then we call it Dr. Pepper or A&W or Mountain Dew. My daughter loves Dr. Pepper, so she sits in the Dr. Pepper team. And when I see Mountain Dew, I think of snowboards and mountains and outdoors and athletic type people. So that's probably who they're marketing to. Well, trafficking is the same. It comes up with schemes and patterns and plans to both attract the victims and then sell the labor or sex. So escorting, stripping, street prostitution, not really any different. Whoever buys pays differently. They're being marketed to for a certain fantasy they have. It's all the same. It's just slavery. There's not a higher or lower level of trauma or torture. It's all really, really painful. Not just for the victim, but their family, society, everything. So I always say, just look at it all as a can of soda. And when you realize it's someone held in service of another through force, fraud, or coercion for labor or commercial sex, that's your can of soda. And then whether it's singing, carnival work, agriculture work, stripping, pornography, prostitution, it's all the same. It's a can of soda. So that's how I make it simple to remember. So in that can of soda is the victim. They're the one that's held through all these schemes and patterns and marketing and deflection and language. Oh my gosh, language. When someone says my cousin, my nerves tremble now, like that word never was scary to me before I learned how to do this. When someone says boyfriend and they're in commercial sex, I don't hear the word boyfriend. I hear the word trafficker. So all these things, in addition to what the victim's feeling, keep it operating in plain sight. So that marketing scheme of, oh, she's just a runaway. Oh, she's just like that. She just doesn't want to work, so she prostitutes herself. Well, that's the myth. Prostitution, anyone in prostitution is in the most dangerous position they could be in ever, no matter what they do. And it's just a myth that lets us not look beneath the surface. So what are the barriers that keep a victim in that maybe we could help with? So a lot of times it's legal. I talked about the one that was facing 35 to life. Well, she wasn't able to speak to anyone, and she certainly didn't believe anyone would believe her. So just advocating for her, writing a 5-page report made all the difference in the world. there were facts in that report. I mean, I did what the facts led me to, but in the end, something that was insurmountable for her and her attorney and even the prosecutor, it became a barrier that was taken away just with the facts. Well documented. They might need identification. Try going a week or so without any ID. It's pretty hard to do and getting more difficult. They don't trust a lot. The bad guy's game is also to let them almost escape and then catch them so they get to a state of learned helplessness, meaning no matter what I do, I can't get out. So trusting that you say, I can help you, woo, that's like asking them to jump off a building and hope you'll catch them. So trust, really important. So sometimes, I repeatedly make contact with them without trying to do anything except build that trust. Money, the whole idea of slavery is the victim has no money of any kind. They have been divested of all their human rights and their labor and their ability to earn money. Maybe no one believes them because we don't really think about how often trafficking exists. So they need someone to, help corroborate what they're saying. Language. Oh my gosh. One of the early cases, the victims were mute and deaf, and so they had a unique form of sign language that no one else knew. They had from an indigenous part of Mexico, and it took 2 translators to get to the prosecutor what was happening. Their case took over a year just to get the statements. It was really, and the bad guys that targeted them, they were doing trinket peddling in the subways in New York, and it was one of the early cases that led to these laws. So bless their hearts. Dental care. I worked with MSNBC to rescue some victims, and we set up in a hotel room and called in what looked like victims advertised on Backpage, and we rescued several. Well, the one of the last ones we rescued, she had an exposed nerve in her tooth. And so for a year, she'd had this exposed nerve. Well, the bad guy just gave her blood pressure medicine. He didn't take her to get it treated. And when the blood pressure medicine wore off, she literally collapsed in my arms. So we called an ambulance and he left her. And when he left her, she agreed to go with us. Before that, she had refused because she knew she had to go back. But once he drove off, leaving her, he didn't know we were helping her, by the way. He just knew an ambulance came for her. And so we took her to an all-night dentist. It was an $1,800 dental bill. And she had not one tooth without a cavity in her whole mouth. So that level of just disregard for life, was there. But we got her fixed. She's good now. So a lot of times they have illness, medical conditions. There's criminal activity around them. Sometimes they can't even tell you what's happened to them. They're so traumatized and sleep deprived. On one that we did with MSNBC, when I was filming, we saw her one night. She didn't go with us. We rebooked her a second night. When she came in and saw it was us, and she was so surprised and happy to see us. And we said, yeah, we saw you last night. She says, last night? That was 3 or 4 days ago. And it was literally the night before. So to her time was real distorted because she hadn't slept and she was traumatized. So anyhow, a lot of them, if they're from another country, maybe just using the phone or the internet doesn't work. So they may not know technology the way we do. I had one that used to call the psychologist who saw hundreds of people, and she'd call and get his voicemail, and she'd go, "It's me," and hang up. So it took him months to figure out who "It's me" was, and they called me, and I had to show her how to leave a voicemail. So things like that. Kind of funny now. So anyhow, this is a news story. Just to break up a little here, that might reiterate a bit of what I'm saying. Hopefully we won't get the ads. I'm trying to open it earlier and make sure we don't, but you never know. That might happen. I picked this one since Ukraine's been in the news lately, so this was a while ago, but kind of relevant.
One simple but brilliant trick to heat your home in 90
We have
seconds
to
and
do
save
the
thousands of
ad.
dollars
Hold
on
on.
your heating bill this winter.
There we go.
Against their will, several women brought from the Ukraine to 8 Mile and forced to do awful things.
And that tops Local 4 News at 5:30. This case of sex trafficking that stretches from Eastern Europe to 8 Mile.
Arrests have already been made, but now a new lawsuit is trying to make a statement about this growing problem. It involves several women brought from the Ukraine to Detroit. They worked as dancers at the former Cheetah Strip Club on 8 Mile. And Local 4's Rod Maloney explains why there could be more trouble for those who ran that club.
In 2005, this strip club went by another name. It was called Cheetahs. And there was a sex slave trade incident here, and 3 people have gone to prison as a result. But this lawsuit filed yesterday says the owners of this club knew exactly what was going on, and now it's time for them to pay. To this day, still fearing for their lives, the 2 young women from the Ukraine who spoke no English are known in the lawsuit as Jane Does 1 and 2. They answered ads for waitress jobs, and they wound up here in Detroit at the club where they were forced to work as strippers 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They were forced to hand over all of their identification papers and money to their employers, whom the suit says beat and raped them when they weren't working at the club. They were held captive inside a suburban home, and this went on for 9 months. Even after repeated suicide attempts, one of the women was forced to keep on dancing. They escaped with the help of a club customer. These 3 men are in federal prison after pleading guilty for this sex slave scam. They are Veniamin Gonekman, his son Alexander Maximenko, who received a 14-year jail sentence, and Mikhail Aronov. They're named in the suit along with the owners of the Ace of Spades.
It's horrifying.
We showed the legal paperwork to Amy Good, CEO of Alternatives for Girls, a Detroit program for women in the sex trade.
A story of cold-hearted, complete disregard for human rights. And that's what trafficking is.
The suit said the club's owners either did or should have known about the slavery operation.
I think it's critical. I think in some ways it might even be more important that institutions that knowingly condone trafficking and sexual exploitation are held accountable.
Now, the club owners are saying that they knew nothing about this situation and that they were cleared by the feds. No charges were ever brought against them. So they believe this suit has no merit. In Detroit, Rod Maloney, Local 4.
There's something there that really pops out at me when he says cleared by the feds. I don't know that they do that. They don't give you a free pass clear or whatever. So yeah, just the language right there is kind of catches my eye. But anyhow, I'm sure that there's as you're doing inspections and things, I just want to show places where it's happened, where you can see it. And in that case, specifically, so the victims are going after a civil case. And so any public records, any reports, any well-written documented things can be so helpful to them. And so this is where, all those inspections, they add up over time, and especially documenting things, or if you see something, being able to engage the other authorities as well. So super important. Things that helped me when I was doing certain cases would be any utterances or lack of utterances by the victims. If you ask them a question, they can't respond, or they don't. If someone answers for them, to document that. If they don't have identification, or if someone else hands you their identification, making note that, Maximenko handed me the passport for Nadia. Just very well-written things like that can be the difference. In that first film with the buffets, there was pictures of where they were living. some of them were living in the restaurants, and you could see those burned burners and beds on the floor, and just things that made no sense. Photographs or descriptions of those are very, very helpful. The number of people working there was important for us to gather because it would change. And so documenting the number of employees and who they were became very helpful. And for that restaurant, each one of them had to have had a food handler's class and have a small card posted that they had completed that. So it was important to take pictures of that and document on a certain date who was there, because it changed so often, and it helped us get an idea of how many people were there. And if they could have gone further, I would love to see the route that they were moved, because they moved them in between restaurants as well. So if you look back at the Cheetahs Club, the strip club, again, documenting who's there, if that becomes part of the inspection, each county and each state are different, but it becomes important because maybe someone there isn't of age. In Texas, they just passed a law where you have to be 21 or older to be inside any strip club, which I guess that's good. It's a partial win. I don't know why we need to sell bodies anyway, but second to that, at least that gets the teenagers out of the strip clubs. So there's real important things that we can do to protect our children, and they shouldn't be in strip clubs. So anyhow, and then this is one more. Let me see. I think I have it up somewhere. This one is so important because it shows you how important it is to not let this happen. I just actually saw this last night, and this is near where I am, Houston. I live near San Antonio. So this man was sentenced for trafficking. Can you read that? A seventh grader was sex trafficked. The Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance is the task force I'm so proud to have helped to build in 2004 and 5. It's a Department of Justice funded task force in Houston and the surrounding areas. And I wrote its first grant. I built it. I begged, stole, and borrowed to get people on the task force. Health inspectors were one of the groups I got on there, along with Texas Rangers and ICE, and just all these wonderful groups working together. Well, all these years later, they were instrumental in prosecuting Juwan James Davis, a 28-year-old that trafficked a 7th grader. What's so important about this, because sadly that's not really unusual, he did plead guilty. This is what every parent, so I'm speaking to you as parents now, as well as inspectors and code enforcement officers and every other role you could be. But if you are a parent, a grandparent, or children, I'm speaking to you in that role now. We open the internet to our children, and never, and I'm not saying you and me, I'm saying we, the world, opened the internet to children and never thought, should we put some protections? Are there consequences? Let me tell you, there are. Our children, all of them that can operate any device, are connected to every bad guy in the world 24/7. And it's horrible. It's not without very severe consequences that we have not addressed as a society. Until a parent has their kid trafficked, they don't know. Even when I've spoken to them in groups, I have little booklets for them to buy or take, or however, And they don't normally do it because they think it's not going to be them until it is. And it is, because since I spoke in a group and their kid goes missing, I find out because they call me for help. Our kids have no chance. These bad guys can make over 350, they make 365,000 a year minimum per victim. Their quotas are 1,000 a day, and if they do porn, it's unlimited. So what would someone do for that amount of money, especially if they're a bad guy? They'll do anything. So when you look at your sweet, wonderful kids and grandkids and how innocent and wonderful they are, they look at them and see a big pile of dollar bills. And they will put in the time, and they have the training of how to manipulate them, how to brainwash them, literally, to isolate them in place. One of the signs is the kids will be in the house and they won't talk to anyone, and they're so angry that the whole house is disrupted, but no one knows why. That's somebody grooming them online. And that's what this man, Davis, did. He met this little girl. She didn't even know about sex, much less be sold for sex. She was at home. He advertised her on Backpage. Even though Backpage is gone, there's still hundreds and thousands of others that replaced it. So we're not safe. Our kids aren't safe. He had a tattoo of his initials placed on her bottom. So he owned and branded her. He had controlled her. Even after he was arrested, he was able to contact her from jail. Can you imagine a parent trying to save this kid? How do you disconnect your kid from the internet? Even if you take her devices away, somebody just gives her another one. You go to school, they put them online. My car emails me when it's time to change the oil. Where do you go? He never let go of her, even from jail. He pressured her to tell him it wasn't true, drop the charges, whatever. You see this line here? Tragically, the minor victim passed away earlier this year at the age of 18. Remember when I started, I said, would you stop this from happening? Would you help a child like this? Would you help an adult in this situation? I think we all would. I think we have to. She died. I wish I could say that's rare. I can tell you numbers of people that have died due to the trauma of the trafficking. Not while they're trafficked, but we get them free and they can't recover. And that tender age this little girl was, it's no surprise. It doesn't say why she died, but I probably know. And that family's destroyed for life, and that girl's gone for life. I don't know why more of us don't know this. I don't know why as much speaking in news as people like me do that it still isn't connecting. But this guy met her online, chatted her up, got her under his control, exploited her, got arrested for that, and she's still dead. So we can't do enough. We can't work fast enough. We can't ignore this any longer. There's more like her. I'm actually going to a ceremony of the 21st birthday of a young lady that lived with me for 6 months. She was trafficked at age 17. She didn't make it to 21. And I still can't reconcile that. It's never going to be okay for me. And again, these two aren't the only ones. So I hope we can make wherever here is for you safer, at least for those teens and young adults, because they just said hi. They were on the internet and said hi. That's it. That's how it starts. And so on my website, I have a booklet for parents and grandparents, 55 things parents and grandparents should know. I urge you, my website is in the description of the speakers here today. Please look that up. If you know someone that needs to read that, please get that for them. They need it. It's things like if you take your child's phone away, the bad guy wanted you to do that. He let you see something inappropriate because then he's going to drop a phone on her that you don't know about. The other thing is, like, when you see something inappropriate on your child's phone, don't delete it. You need to save that, because if he or she goes missing, that's what I need to find them. I need to know who was chatting inappropriately. I wish they weren't on the internet till they're 30. If you have children, you should monitor them and not tell them it's okay to spy on them. You must. That 13-year-old had no chance against the seasoned criminal. He knew what to say, how to say it, when to say it, how to manipulate her, and how to keep her under his control. So we just can't let it happen. It's up to us to protect them, not up to them to tell us there's a problem. They can't do it. So, and if you think, oh, my kid will tell me, you just imagine what you didn't tell your parents. And then think, oh, my kid would tell me. They can't. So please don't put them in that position. So I created this document, 55 things that, and please, if this doesn't apply to you, please disregard ordinance. I wrote it for some ordinance inspectors a while back, and I think it's a good one. So based on the book I talked about for parents, I made some for inspectors, and there's just kind of a list of things that that you might want to know. So if you will either email me, my email's in the description, or go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, I will make sure you get that, and you can share it, do what you want with it. I'd love you to have it. If you want to just reach directly out to me, you can get me at trafficked, TRAFFICKED, at protonmail.com, and I'll send you this PDF. It's just a list of things that you might want to know or think about as you're doing inspections. And it summarizes what we've talked about today, specific to what y'all are doing. You look at a lot of neighborhood complaints, frequently failing inspections, not caring if they get fined, just repetitively the same violations. Most business people want to try to comply. Maybe some have trouble, but the one that just fails, like I said, that restaurant for 20 years, it never passed a health inspection. Things like that you want to look for. So I made this available. Also, I made these red flag cards. They're little pocket cards. It's set up to print, so it would fit in your pocket. And one side is blank, so you could put your agency your organization on it. And then the other side has the indicators, questions to ask, things like that. It's just a simple little card you can keep in your pocket. And I'll make that available to you too. If you want to send me an email at trafficked@protonmail.com. And I'll get those to you. And I would love for you to use them, change them, whatever you want. They're for you to use in your community. And I'd love to see them out there making a difference. So anyhow, they're just a little trifold card that looks like that. And you can hand it out to your colleagues, your bosses, your whoever. Paper the town with them. Yeah. So anyhow, we have a few moments. Are there any questions? Well, if not, I thank you all so much for being here. I thank you for listening. I love this Zoom idea, although I'd rather meet you all in person, but I'm honored to have been here. And I want to thank Arne for helping me get all my technical things working and bringing me to you today.
Thank you so much, Daddy. It's much appreciated. For anyone that's still logged in, I'm going to pause the recording for right now because we're going to break for lunch. So this session will be closed and I'll reopen it up when it's time for the lunch session to start. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you back after lunch.
Bye from Texas. Have lunch for me.
Bye.